I blame the media. It's all the media's fault. What we need is a media whipping boy. Oh, that's right, that's me. I'm Paul Alexander from Radically Rational, where we're bringing facts back into fashion and making simple sanity, for goodness sake, sexy again. I'm coming to you from San Antonio. My podcast co-host, the amazing Lauri Pearson, ensconced comfortably in her home in Austin. True confession time. Lauri and I both have extensive media backgrounds, but neither one of us has been arrested for sedition so far today, although the day is young. Lauri, welcome.
It is. It's early.
All right, one of the things that we do here on Radically Rational is, what's going on in the media is a pretty good barometer of what's going on in the country. And what I mean by that, nobody seems satisfied. People are very polarized, not only on issues, but in terms of the media itself. There's plenty of blame to go around. There are some things for which the media is very much to blame. There are also some problems on the consumer side. But as far as we can figure out, this all started with the advent of cable news, and in particular, CNN. And we have a gentleman on who has a perspective on what has gone on over the last 4 decades, where we were before, and how we got to this place right now, and if there is a way out of it. We are delighted to welcome one of the original news anchors at CNN, and a gentleman I've had the pleasure of knowing for a long time. More on that a little bit later, and we'll have some fun. But Lou Waters joining us from his home in Tucson. Welcome and thank you, and how are you?
I'm fine. I don't know this is, hello to you both. I don't know that that's correct, that this all started with CNN.
Well, let me let you correct that then. Where do you think it started?
I just finished the book, the Pulitzer Prize-winning book by John Meacham, the historian, who not only talked about media, but the founding of our country and every president since 1776. And we've been here before, and we're here again, and we have our problems, but my main function now, since I'm no longer in the business, is to follow the news very closely. I've been asked from time to time to speak about it. And I don't know if you caught the news this morning, but I'm all into changes now. What is changing because of the pandemic? We know in 1918, for instance, that our entire cultural and political landscape was redrawn. And it's happening again. If you caught the news this morning, you may have seen that the White House and the Congress have agreed on a bipartisan infrastructure bill that they've been diddling around with for decades. And isn't it ironic, on the very same day, a condo collapsed in Miami along the seashore. They're still looking for the people who are missing. One is dead, a couple are in the hospital. What else is new? Rudy Giuliani has had his law certificate rescinded by the courts. It's sort of, in the words of Huffington Post, a snapback on the big lie. So we're in a correction mode right now.
When I had the pleasure of speaking with you last week, and it had been a long time, and it was just so good to get caught up personally, but one of the things you said was that at the advent of CNN, when that idea was born, you said something that I found very insightful and very amusing. You said it was really a heck of an idea, and in some ways, it didn't take us very long to screw it up. What'd you mean?
Well, it was a heck of an idea. It was hatched by Ted Turner and Reese Schoenfeld, the first president of CNN. And it was designed based on Ted's experience with the cable, with the ball games at the Atlanta Superstation. He just expanded the idea into the knowledge that we were in a new digital age. It was coming on, and there'll be lots of news, lots of weather, lots of sports. We thought we would be the news, and we were the only guys in town. I was hired by Sam Zellman, who was a recruiter from CBS in New York, where he invited me to be a co-anchor to Jim Jensen at WCBS. And the first question they asked me when I went to New York was, how would you feel about working with a co-anchor that's chewed up every one of his partners he's ever worked with? I said, no, I don't think so. I'm going back to Tucson. So Sam Zellman quit, or retired actually, his talent searching job at CBS, and went and became Ted Turner's first executive. And he called me up. He said, how would you like a job with long hours, very little pay, and no guarantee, a guarantee of success? I said, oh, that's perfect.
Yeah, sign me up. Who wouldn't love that?
Yeah.
Laurie Pearson, you have been in positions like that. Sounds like a job description for a lot of the great things that you've done, you know?
That's radio. That's radio in a nutshell.
Yeah, really. That's how I started. I did 13 years of that before I got to.
You were used to that.
Well, anyway, the theory was that CNN would be 24-hour a day news. And all of us, the first original 8 anchors, said, how in the hell are you going to do that? And that was the big question, they said. He said, first executive producer was Ted Kavanaugh. He said, well, if it doesn't work, we all can go to different places and hire each other. Because the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, all those, Westinghouse, all of them said it won't work. There's no way this will work. There's no audience for it. Our goal was to compete against the network newses, you know, the Eastern Seaboard News hour. And we floundered. We screwed up big time. We messed up. Some people were pushed out because they did some plagiarizing. I mean, we did it all. And not until 1991, the Gulf War, did we prove that it could be done, that there was an audience for it. And that's when all the rest jumped in. And now we have too much of it, some suggest. Too much of it. They all jumped in, and now we've got news outlets competing against other news. They play sound bites from their coverage so that they can snap back with their coverage. I mean, it's just nuts. But
you said something that really tripped my trigger a minute ago. You said we found an audience. Okay, well, I mean, finding a market for your product would seem to be a good thing. But as it turns out, historically, you could make a pretty good case that finding that audience was the source of all the trouble that followed. Because what happened is folks in TV news who historically had not been a profit center. Matter of fact, the 3 networks, their executives would meet every year and they would decide how much money they could afford to lose. It was a lost leader. It was regarded as a public service. Right. But then folks and bean counters and a lot of well-intentioned people figured out ways they could make ginormous money on this. And if a 30-minute news show was good, an hour news show was even better. And what could be better than 24 hours? And trying to fill up that content bucket and identify it appropriately has a lot to do with the murkiness of American media and why a lot of people at this point just don't trust it. You see it that way?
Well, a lot of people don't trust it for sure. It was about maybe 10 years ago. I was at a thing. I was asked to make some remarks. And at that time, the Gallup poll had the media at its lowest level. And I can't remember how long. But it was a notch above the Congress's approval level. That's where we were as a, you know. And as I said, this is not new. I mean, it was Mark Twain that said, if you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read the newspaper, you're misinformed. So this back and forth has been going on forever. Right. It's just nuts. But it has come to this point now where we just went through a reality TV show in the White House and in the Congress. And it's now got to shake itself out, and so does the media. The media, I've studied the media intensely. Why? Because I was an architectural engineering student at the University of Minnesota. My dad was an architect. He thought it'd be a good idea if I be. So I was there. But while I was there, I discovered the campus radio station. And I said, ding, that's what I want. I want broadcasting. I want news. So, and here I am still worrying about the future of the news business because it's so important. Even John Kennedy said, you know, a president can't do its job without the aggravation of the press at his heels. I mean, they know they can't succeed without the media. So it's how they use the media that's our problem, I guess.
Lou, right or wrong, and Lauri, you can speak to this too. There is this perception, is there not, Lauri, that now it's all about boutique news. It's about selecting your personal preference in affirmation. And it's really about, it's almost like you're backing a sports team, that you're on one side or the other, wearing one jersey or the other. A whole lot of heat, very little light.
It is. It's selecting your own personal little echo chamber almost. And, you know, Lou, you've been on this scene since the onset. I'd be curious to know, and you've obviously been watching it, the evolution of it, the de-evolution of it, the separation of parties, as it were. You know, Paul, you talked earlier about finding your audience. What do you think about the psychology, because that's really what it is, of keeping the audience, you know, keeping them, you know, gosh, I can't remember who it was that I saw. You may know. I saw an interview a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying the psychology of feeding the, you know, if it bleeds, it leads, feeding the horror stories and the horror shots and the blood and the death and all these things, and then rewarding us with a little happy story at the end. You know, like there is a psychology behind it. So what has been your experience in that?
Well, we've gotten to the point with all of the cable news channels, if they can all be called news channels now, where if they appeal to your view of the world, you will go to them and you will watch them and follow them. There are many views of the world out there being splattered at us. And it was George Packer, a journalist, who said that people are confused about what they're reading. They don't know what's real. And they're dealing with a completely different set of facts when they're arguing about politics, because we're all swimming in this sea of rather poisonous and polarized media. But I advocate it's your job as a citizen to check all the points of view. I think what's gone wrong, when I left CNN, we were doing the news. When I left, it switched to opinion journalism. Yeah. You watch now, we don't have camera crews out doing investigative reports. We have reporters from other sources sitting alongside our network anchors and, well, what's your opinion of that? Well, they give their opinion and turn to the next guest. What's your opinion of that opinion?
Lou, I think that's absolutely.
No wonder they're confused.
Lou, I think that's absolutely spot on. I mean, it really is. You have journalists interviewing other journalists. And again, the slave master here is the 24-hour cycle. And I would maintain, Lou and Lauri, that a big problem here, and public opinion polls reflect this, is there is a truth in labeling problem. Because you're having to fill up 24 hours, it's very difficult to tell where the news ends and the opinion begins. And by the way, that's somewhat on purpose because these formats have been developed and melded that way. And so a lot of people are saying, and I don't think they're necessarily wrong, I think the media has to be really responsive to responsible criticism, is it's just hard to tell where you jump from news to opinion, to pure opinion, to time-filling opinion. And I think that's why a lot of people, Lou and Lauri, are so cynical right now.
Yeah, well, there's nothing wrong with opinion. You just have to label it. You know, a lot of people condemn the New York Times for being liberal and lefty and, okay, they're, you know, left center. But that's their opinion page. When it comes down to it, they got some correct reporters on the New York Times and on the Washington Post, which leads me to the next thing that's happening. The changes that are happening are intriguing me. I don't know if you know who Ezra Klein is. He is a wunderkind kind of journalist who worked for the New York Times, Washington Post, did a podcast with the Post. He quit and went to Yahoo. And now he's quit Yahoo, and he's a co-founder of Vox, vox.com.
Oh, yes.
And this is new. There are a lot of legacy reporters and journalists who are branching out on their own. That's a big change because they're coming up with their own views of the world based on their experience. And what the advocates say, and Andy Lack with Bloomberg Media is one of them, is that the walls are coming down. Republican and Democrats, liberal, conservative, old media, new media. There's becoming a new way to experience information. Andrew Lack said, it wasn't too long ago when someone handed me a screen, an iPad. They have little ones and medium little ones and medium ones and great big ones. And he said, now I can't live without the damn thing. And they all say, Lack and David Carr, who is a hero of mine, he died at 58. He was a columnist for the New York Times, just brilliant. And it was a teacher at Boston University. And he and Lack and all the others that I've checked in on are saying it's all about storytelling now. That's the natural evolution. Everyone has to tell the story. It was Edward R. Murrow who said way back when, our job is to tell stories that illuminate, educate, or inspire. Otherwise, we're all lights and wires in a box. And we know that over 70% of people get their news from television, so something has to be done. And the very responsible people are doing it, in my judgment. I'm holding out hope.
Oh, I love it.
Our guest here on Radically Rational is one of the original television anchors at CNN, Lou Waters, who has enjoyed such an astounding career in a lot of different areas, and we'll cast a little more light on that for sure. But, you just referenced Edward R. Murrow. And yeah. Lou, I think there is this feeling that there is this romanticized period in particularly broadcast and television news, and that prior to the advent of cable news, it was all pristine, it was all clean. You see posts on social media. Do you remember when Walter Cronkite would just look into the camera and deliver the news? Yes and no. We had 3 network news operations. But this idea that it was born on high at that point and that we didn't have some of the same issues that we have right now. For example, Edward R. Murrow, as wonderful as he was hawking cigarettes about half the time. And people forget Walter Cronkite, for as solid a journalist as he was, Walter Cronkite essentially ended the Vietnam War. You've heard Lyndon Johnson say that he knew we had lost the war when he lost Walter Cronkite. So the idea that news people have never been injected into the news is just historically false.
Right. Walter Cronkite walked off the battlefield as a war reporter to get to the anchor desk eventually. I would say that his comments about the war were significant. However, the people who were in the streets protesting that war had a lot to do with ending that war too. But the McCarthy era. Do you know anything about the McCarthy era? He lit a fire under the media because of his rhetoric, and the Denver Post publisher, Palmer White, said that many changes made by him, which he called reckless and impulsive, cannot and should not be ignored. And that was the start back, this is in the 1950s, when he said, we need to inject facts into what McCarthy is saying, because McCarthy was calling everyone, including the president, a traitor. And then until Hoyt and others injected facts into these McCarthy statements, this rhetoric, this damaging rhetoric, nothing ever came of it. It was a critique of McCarthy that he couldn't stand. He was finally being pushed back on it. And Hoyt, while saying there's nothing wrong with injecting facts into a story about someone who's doing this. And how did McCarthy respond to this? He went on the offensive and he singled out specific publications and particular journalists. Mm-hmm. Does that sound familiar?
Yes, I think very recently, in fact.
Yeah,
so, Lou, you've seen so much over the course of your career, and I've always known you to be kind of a futurist. Your best guess, where do we go from here? What is the next iteration of television news? Can we heal this mistrust that much of the nation feels here? Is there a way to salvage this? And not that I haven't asked you enough questions, do you even think the institution of local television news will exist a decade from now?
Oh boy, that's a good one. I know newspapers won't. I've done a couple of podcasts. I don't know how to edit them, so I don't do a lot of them. But I did one recently with David Fitzsimmons, who is a cartoonist, longtime cartoonist for the Arizona Daily Star. He's won awards for the political cartoons, or editorial cartoons as they're more realistically called, are going away. New York Times has stopped doing them. And he says the result of that will be the end of the Arizona Daily Star too, he gave it 10 years. But local news is in trouble, but for many more reasons than the people don't like it. Local news is more appreciated than national news.
That's very true.
And so that's our old job. But as far as the future of journalism, I am in agreement with David Carr, who said, I'm not so much interested in the future of journalism, but more interested in the future we're living in. And he's talking about, because he taught at Boston University, he taught maybe 30, 40 classes to student journalists, advising them, helping them, and letting them know that there's no more back in the day. It's not going to be you get out of this journalism class and you go to the college newspaper, and then you'll go to a regional newspaper. And David Carr realized that it's so tough, and you guys will probably know this better than anybody. It's very hard to get going in this business. It just takes forever. And I'm a perfect example of that. I went into radio and ended up on national TV. And it was tough. It's very tough. And David Carr said, you got to come from your own experience in life to tell the stories that you tell through your experience of it. And the bottom line is that these kids coming into it are probably more intense than ever. But I don't know. I did a talk over at the University of Arizona. I was asked to talk to the journalism students there. And after I did my bit, I said, any questions? First question was from a kid who had long hair. And he said, can you tell me how I can become an anchorman? I said, yeah, first you learn how to write, and then you learn how to edit, and then you learn how to shoot film, and then you need to be a reporter, and then you need to know how to tell a story. And maybe then he wanted to be an anchor. They want to be in the celebrity of it, the theater of it, the entertainment of it. I never wanted to be an anchor. I wanted to be a reporter, but they kept putting me back on the anchor desk.
Lauri, this is probably the right time for full disclosure. Lou and I have a history, and it dates back to the late 1970s, and I am forever grateful to Lou Waters. But Lou was the news director at KOLD TV in Tucson, the CBS affiliate, and I was employed there. And I will tell you this, Lou, I really mean this. I have been so fortunate, and just nothing but gratitude on my part, that I have had experiences that I probably thought I would never have when I was a kid growing up in Central Texas. And that period that we spent together in the late 70s, I still regard as kind of the golden period of my life in journalism, in the sense that it was the size market where you had adequate resources, but it wasn't all about stardom. It was about doing good work. In fact, I'm going to say this. I left KOLD TV for a job I could not turn down at the Network O&O in St. Louis, and it was a wonderful job, and I'm grateful for that. But I will tell you this. It was a step down in journalism. I got a quote-unquote better job doing news that was not the equal of what we were doing in Tucson in 1978, and you get a lot of credit for that.
Well, thank you, but we had fun. And that illustrates my point that it's difficult getting there. All the side streets and avenues you have to take in order to make your mark. But you have to have a certain dedication. And if you're thinking about becoming an anchorman or making a lot of money, those are probably the wrong places to start with this business.
Well, Lauri, I want to say this in front of you and everyone else. Lou, this has really been bothering my conscience now for decades and decades.
Uh-oh.
No, I know that I was more than a handful and that I must have kept you up a couple of times at night. I just want to say that I'm really sorry, sorta, but you need to know this. There is some cosmic justice here, because I just spent over a decade as a local television news director, and it's the reason why I don't have any hair anymore. And the people that you're describing, that they want to walk in the door and be an anchor, that's why we're doing podcasts now, brother.
Yeah, it's not an easy gig. Lauri, what's your question?
Oh, gosh, I had so many. But, just thinking about what happened to, and I've wondered that, when the present company excluded, but when newscasters all of a sudden turned into models, I don't know when that happened. It didn't matter that you had a good story to interpret for your audience, or that you had a fair point to make. It no longer mattered that you could accurately and in a very complex manner articulate the different sides of a story, and you could talk to someone else one-on-one and connect and draw them out. That didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was that you had a boob job, present company excluded, big hair, and could blink once during your entire newscast. All of a sudden it just zeroed out, and I don't know what happened to the talent. So, it's like, I would want to say this, people, I'm sure you both get this too, would ask me that, how do you get into radio? Or in my case, how do you get into voiceover? Well, I wish it was so simple that I could just give you an answer. I think you have to be, I think the magic is gone from many newscasters, many reporters, and from the industry in general. And it has kind of turned into this, Miss and Mr. America show of who can sneer without really sneering. And, just, I don't know. I think that's missing. Do you know when that happened? Like, when did it turn into that?
Consultants. You mentioned earlier about the way local newscasts are assembled with the little funny bit at the end.
Yes.
It's so true. I mean, and it's so ridiculous. When I got off of CNN, came back to Tucson, they asked, company purchased this independent station. We want to do a news program. So they hired a 24-year-old producer and hired me as a consultant or whatever. And the night that the Katrina storm hit, Fats Domino was missing. I don't know if you remember that story. He was missing. They couldn't find him. So I had interviewed Fats Domino on Millennial Eve, and I got to know him. He's very shy. It was a terrible interview, but he sang a little song for me. but when I called in, this producer said, we're going to have this, at the end of the newscast, we're going to have this funny about a bunny rabbit or something. I don't know. I said, no, we're going to do the story. I have video of him, of the missing Fats Domino. Antoine Fats Domino is missing in a hurricane in Louisiana. That's what we're going to tag. It's an essay. I'll write the essay. I came in, that isn't the way we do things here. Well, who told you that? Well, our consultant says we have a little kicker at the end. I said, well, this is a kicker. It's going to be a little bit bigger of a kicker. And so we did it my way. And she couldn't stand it. I mean, and that's what's happening in the local news.
Yeah.
I so much want to write a comedic novel or screenplay entitled Consultant. I mean, the comic opportunity is there, but Lou, you're 100% right. It does become very formulaic, and you have formats that are counter-programming other formats, and it does become very predictable.
It does. I mean, they have their rules. I mean, it comes from on high. Like, there's the thing about Roger Ailes at Fox had women with short skirts so we could see their legs. That was just by design.
Right.
And a blonde woman with a black man, very model-like. Those are perfect news teams. Really, this is why legacy people, and I admire Ezra Klein, for getting away from the way it's done to the way it should be done. Mm-hmm. We're evolving. This is an evolution. Like the Bloomberg guy, Lackey said, we're at the intersection of journalism and media business. Same as back in the 20s, Paul. You remember yellow journalism?
No question about it. And, yeah, I know earlier.
Again.
Well, you referenced the John Meacham book, The Soul of America. You turned me on to this. And on the one hand, Mitch seems to confirm what we know. Yeah, these are really tough times and things are really crappy. So that's kind of a downer. But then he goes out of his way to say, if you really look at this, it has been cyclical, and we actually have been in worse shape. And at least to date, America has not only survived, but come out the other end the better for it. Are you optimistic that that is, again, possible?
Yeah. Yes.
Nice.
This book was presented to me by a friend of mine here named Dave Perry, who used to be a reporter in Wyoming, newspaper reporter. He said, I'm a newspaper reporter, I said, there is hope. I said, there is? Yeah, read John Meacham's Soul of America. So I immediately got it, read it. It's true. I suggest everyone read it because we can learn from looking back, but we can't rest on our laurels. We have to push through. The one saving factor is, I imagine Lauri is one, a millennial. Are you a millennial?
No, I'm post-millennial.
Post-millennial. So am I.
After that.
But half the workforce is millennial, and they are really committed. I have twin millennial boys, and they call me all the time. What's new, Dad? What do we need to know?
I love it.
And one of them went to the School of Journalism. I never even suggested it. They didn't go into journalism, but they're really intense about it. There's a lot of hope in the air that we can get. And isn't it ironic that the day that infrastructure bill is agreed to by both the White House and the Congress, they didn't plan for this, of course, in their bill, but a condo collapsed in Florida. I mean, we're 28th on the list of countries whose interior is falling apart,
Right.
Our guest is one of the original anchors on CNN who has done it all and seen it all in journalism, and pretty interesting life. You mentioned your initial interest and commitment to engineering and architecture. Then there was your journalism career, which continues, but also Dude, you are a world-class landscape photographer. And of course, your home is in Arizona, so it's hard to beat those desert landscapes. But
Yeah.
tell us about how you got into that, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to show our folks some of these amazing pictures.
Oh, I've been taking pictures since I was 9 years old. My first was a little box camera. I used to ride on the back shelf of my dad's Chevy. And when he drove over the Golden Gate Bridge, I was taking pictures of the Golden Gate Bridge as we went over. But I shot professionally in television with, the Bolexes and the CP16s.
Yeah.
And so that's 16 millimeter film for you younger folks. Then they went to digital, and I thought, oh God, this film is not as good. It's not as good as film. Film is much more
Warmer, richer. Yeah.
To it, But I continued to take photos the whole time. And so when the pandemic hit, and I always have to be doing something, I went in my computer. I have about 3 million photographs in there. I said, now what I'm going to do with these? I can't do digital. Well, I don't get all the clicks, but I did subscribe to Lightroom, and I began to edit them. And I said, well, I'm going to post them on Facebook and Instagram, which I did. And I got a lot of people appreciating the fact that I wasn't talking about politics or not even allowing politics to be discussed, because you know how that went. And that's all I've been doing. And I go out when I can. I've been designing a road trip, but it's so friggin' hot here in Arizona.
Right.
It's like first I in front of this screen here for the pandemic, and I'm in front of because it's 137 degrees.
If it's not one thing, it's another. No question.
Yeah, that's all. I just into photography. That's my hobby.
Well, Lou, I love the metaphor, because in a lot of ways you have been taking laser-focused snapshots of American life and American affairs and American journalism in such a distinguished way. I will tell you that my professional respect is unlimited, and my personal regard is really off the charts. And like I said, one more time, I'm mostly sorry.
Nice. Wow.
I don't receive comments like that very well. But thank you.
Lou, thanks
I don't
again.
receive them because it makes me blush.
You've been a great boss, a great friend, and a great journalist. And here on Radically Rational, we are honored that you have been our guest, one of the original anchors on CNN. So we appreciate everybody joining us here on Radically Rational. The whole idea is we don't like this post-fact world. We want to bring facts back into fashion. We want to make simple sanity sexy again, and you can hold me to it, because if I don't follow those rules, I get verbally busted by an 8-year-old girl. So again, we want to thank you for listening. We invite you to visit our new spaceship website, radicallyrational.com. Got all kinds of fun stuff there. So once again, thanks to all, Lou Waters, Lauri Pearson, and to all of you. And remember this, at Radically Rational, we're not crazy, but some of y'all pretty sketchy. Later.